history of racing games dates back all the way to the earliest origins of video games. Years before the first ever Space Invader began its steady descent to Earth, there were rudimentary racing games appearing in arcades and on the earliest home video game consoles. There aren't many genres that can chart their histories back this far. From Daytona to Drive Club, we've always been able to rely on racing games to squeeze every ounce of performance from any given platform. Racing games are constantly resetting the boundaries of what's possible, and the genre has been doing it for decades. Forza Horizon 5 has many folks floored by its show-stopping visuals and genre-leading open-world racing, but it's unlikely fans will be shocked the Forza teams have again raised the bar here. At this point, it's standard operating procedure. Microsoft's Forza series emerged in the mid-2000s as a crosstown rival to Sony's own Gran Turismo, a record-breaking series itself and one of the most influential and important races ever made. After more than 15 years and 4 console generations, however, Forza has gone on to cement itself as one of the most dependable, successful, and consistently acclaimed racing series ever. This is the story of how the Forza series has championed the power of Xbox over 4 generations. Developer Turn 10 was established way back in 2001 as Microsoft's in-house racing game studio. Xbox owners already had the much adored but more arcade-oriented Project Gotham racing series from British racing specialist Bizarre Creations, but Microsoft needed another racer. A simulation-style racing game with a vaguely Italian-inspired name that could go door-handle to door-handle with Sony's best-selling Gran Turismo. You need to remember, while shooters and action games dominate sales charts today, at the turn of the century, the original PlayStation was heading off into the sunset with the original Gran Turismo locked in as the highest-selling game ever released on the console, and Gran Turismo 3 had just arrived on the new PlayStation 2, a game that would go on to shift over 14 million copies and would only ever be surpassed by GTA San Andreas at the very tip of the all-time PS2 sales charts. Back in 2004, in the wake of the announcement of the original Forza Motorsport, Microsoft was making no secrets about both its respect for Gran Turismo and its desire to both target it and beat it. Microsoft wanted some motoring muscle it could call its own. It would get it thanks to Turn 10. In the early days of Turn 10, the studio boasted just 24 staff, though this would later grow by around 40 as the team wrestled to complete its hugely ambitious debut project. After a couple of slight delays, the original Forza Motorsport was released in May 2005.
Forza Motorsport. You are what you race.
Arriving to universal acclaim, Forza Motorsport achieved what Microsoft had intended, inviting immediate and favourable comparisons to Gran Turismo. In fact, in some areas, it was already eclipsing it. Forza Motorsport couldn't match the raw number of cars available in 2004's Gran Turismo 4, but it had arrived with some big-shot boutique brands that were noticeably absent from Sony's series, including Ferrari, Porsche, and Koenigsegg. And it did feature the first iteration of Forza's now famous livery editor and a dynamic racing line to help beginner drivers understand both the demands of the tracks and the limits of whatever car they were in. Unlike GT, Forza Motorsport's cars also featured full damage modelling, accumulating realistic battle scars as they tussled on track and suffering mechanical damage that would affect car performance. Even the tracks themselves took abuse for that matter. Hefty scrapes and shunts would leave telltale streaks of paint on concrete walls, evidence of either an over-ambitious corner exit or a bit of hip and shoulder action on a nasty overtake. Racing against the AI was a more robust experience in the original Forza than GT4 too. While in Gran Turismo, opponents still felt more like slot cars steadfastly locked to a groove, Forza Motorsport's AI opponents behaved far more authentically. In fact, the original Forza Motorsport is home to the first iteration of Forza's learning AI, dubbed Drivatar, which would track your skills and improve as a driver as you did. The original Forza Motorsport's true ace in the hole, however, was its online multiplayer. Online play had initially been announced for Gran Turismo 4, but a few months before its December 2004 release date, Sony confirmed it would not feature. Aware of the growing importance of online multiplayer from its experience with PGR and Rally Sport Challenge, Forza Motorsport featured 8-player online racing. Online racing has been central to the Forza experience since day one. Arriving late in the Xbox's lifespan, it would appear Forza Motorsport had mustered just about every bit of performance from the original Xbox that it could, establishing many of the series' core pillars in the process. Its next home would be the Xbox 360, which would launch later the same year, but Forza's debut on the Xbox 360 wouldn't come until May 2007. Forza Motorsport 2 pumped up the frame rate to a far silkier 60 frames per second, with the extra power afforded by Microsoft's new hardware. Perhaps more impressive, however, was the way Forza Motorsport 2 harnessed the power of Xbox 360 players as opposed to simply the box itself. Introducing an online auction house to the series, Forza Motorsport 2 allowed players to not only sell unwanted cars to one another for in-game credits, they could also use the improved livery editor to create incredible race car replicas, wild works of art, and everything in between, and then share them with other players. User-generated content remains an absolutely key component of the Forza franchise to this day. Forza Motorsport 2 also set the blueprint for the series' now extensive post-release support, with several batches of new cars coming to the game following its arrival. While Forza cars take multiple people many months each to complete, new cars are always being finalised because the Forza team is always building them. Subsequently, all Forza games since have been supported with post-release DLC. This most recently crescendoed with Forza Horizon 4, which was supported initially with a variety of paid DLC, then a steady supply of free cars every week for 3 years. Forza Motorsport 3, which arrived in 2009, introduced new elements that would wring even more performance out of the Xbox 360. Despite ballooning to 2 discs to compensate for its ever-expanding garage, which now included prestige manufacturers like Bugatti and a variety of new racing cars, Forza Motorsport 3 introduced cabin views for every car in the game. It also introduced a rewind function. This concept had admittedly previously appeared in Codemasters' Race Driver Grid in 2008, but there's no doubt the rewind has since become a highly recognisable component of Forza's commitment to accessibility. Forza Motorsport 3 enjoyed a warm reception and was supported for many months with additional content to keep players busy behind the wheel. But Turn 10 wasn't done squeezing every last drop of oomph from the console. The third and final Forza Motorsport installment for the lengthy Xbox 360 generation landed in October 2011 with Forza Motorsport 4.
A place that celebrates speed, grit, gears, and fun. And it's all here for you to explore.
Forza Motorsport 4 brought with it a significantly improved level of visual quality, thanks to an excellent new image-based lighting model. This meant each car was authentically lit by the environments themselves, which meant the cars looked wonderfully seated within the tracks and the other locations they could be placed in. It was all still running at 60 frames per second too, which at this stage was definitely pushing the aging Xbox 360 to its limits. Of course, back in 2011, Microsoft was still pressing full steam ahead on Kinect, the ill-fated motion-sensing camera that's since been relegated to the technology boneyard to waste away alongside the fax machine, the overhead projector, and a whole bunch of Blackberries. While the Kinect quickly became a fertile breeding ground for forgettable, family-friendly flotsam and spectacularly weird uses of Harrison Ford's likeness, Forza Motorsport 4 actually featured one of the best ever uses of the doomed device. Though we're not talking about the ability to drive your cars by sticking both fists out in front of you and wrestling an invisible steering wheel, we're talking about the subtle use of head tracking. Via Kinect, Forza Motorsport 4 allowed players to check their mirrors, look through apexes, and look ahead while maintaining sick drift angles with exceedingly minor head movements, and it worked extremely well. Looking back, it was actually an early taste of the same kind of immersion that playing racing games in VR offers today, and in 2D it definitely has a GoPro-like quality to it that resembles captured VR footage. Back in the early era of Kinect, it was confirmed that the device operated using just a single-digit percentage of the Xbox 360 CPU, but it remains impressive that Turn 10 was able to find the headroom for it, alongside what was the best-looking Forza game to date, and one that still ran at an always unwavering 60 frames per second. While head tracking would ultimately be a short-lived feature in the Forza series, Forza Motorsport 4 did introduce some big new features that remain a part of the franchise today. Forza Vista debuted in Forza Motorsport 4, although it was called Auto Vista for its first iteration. Forza Motorsport 4's Auto Vista was limited to a handful of the game's most exotic and iconic cars, but it was an exceedingly effective showcase of the stunning level of detail that Turn 10 was beginning to capture in its vehicles. Doors could be opened, engine bays inspected, and even the smallest details on screws, stickers, and stereos were represented. Auto Vista would later become Forza Vista, and it would be expanded to every car in the game, but it shouldn't be forgotten that it was first achieved on a console that was released when there were still only 2 Fast and Furious movies, and only one of them had Vin Diesel in it.
What are you smiling about?
But the folks at Forza weren't done with the Xbox 360 yet, and their next move would change the Forza franchise forever. The original Forza Horizon arrived on Xbox 360 in late October 2012, but the story of the game starts a little over 2 years before that, when Forza franchise creative director Dan Greenawalt challenged the team at the then freshly established UK studio Playground Games to come back with a new direction they could take the Forza brand in for a proposed sister series to Forza Motorsport. Playground's answer was the original Forza Horizon, a racing game that took Forza Motorsport's deep ode to global car culture and its very recognisable look and feel, and then set it all loose in a beautiful open world driving paradise, all hinged around a heaving music and motoring celebration, the Horizon Festival, which would pitch its first tent in the Colorado countryside. Forza Horizon was an immediate success, and it instantly reset the bar for the open world racing genre, a sector it has reigned supreme over ever since. Considering the depth of driving talent that had accumulated at Playground Games, it really shouldn't have come as a surprise to anyone. Founded by Codemasters veterans, Playground Games was packed with developers from all corners of the UK's famously rich racing game scene, including Bizarre Creations, Rockstar North, Criterion, Reflections, Evolution, Juice Games, Supersonic Software, Slightly Mad, BlackRock, and Eutechnics. Playground Games was a literal supergroup of some of the UK's finest racing game creators. It may have been a brand new studio working on its first title, but combined with the support of Forza Motorsport custodians Turn 10, experience was not something it lacked. Turn 10's technology also gave Playground an incredible springboard to build upon, which resulted in a number of firsts. Locking the frame rate to 30 but ensuring it never ever dropped or fluctuated meant Playground Games could emulate the always smooth look of the Forza franchise, but afforded it the headroom to add a dynamic time of day cycle, bringing night racing into the equation. With that, Playground needed to add functioning driving lights and illuminated dials for cabin view, and some of the cars even required special things like pop-up headlamps, which resulted in some of the most authentic and convincing car models to date. Forza Horizon was also our first taste of Forza-flavoured off-road racing, which the Playground team later doubled down on in the first Forza Horizon expansion, Horizon Rally. But while Horizon was conquering a genre, the Forza series as a whole would find itself with a new horizon to conquer of its own. It was big, it was black, and it survived on Matrix flak. With the arrival of the Xbox One in 2013, it was entirely a given that the Forza series would migrate to it. In this case, however, Forza made a home for itself on the new Xbox One straight away, as Forza Motorsport 5 was a launch game for the fresh machine. The immediate debut of the series had some side effects, in an almost identical fashion to Gran Turismo's leap from PlayStation 1 to PlayStation 2, where GT3 arrived with less than a third of GT2's 650 cars. Forza Motorsport 5 came with around 200 cars, compared to just over 650 for Forza Motorsport 4. It also had fewer tracks. It was, however, a big technical leap and a pretty fabulous first glimpse at what would be possible for the Forza franchise throughout the Xbox One generation. Forza Motorsport 5 kicked the resolution up to 1080p while maintaining 60 frames per second. New lighting techniques were employed to bring never-before-seen levels of authenticity to the various surface types and materials in cars. Setting a new precedent, every car in Forza Motorsport 5 could be closely inspected from any angle in Forza Vista mode, not just the select bunch. There may have been fewer cars here than in Forza Motorsport 4, but Forza Motorsport 5 was a total reset in the level of detail the Forza series would now feature in every car going forward. Exploring every inch revealed the cars were modelled down to every lead, light and manufacturer label. The Xbox One's new haptic triggers were also brought into the equation, with the additional feedback becoming a new way for controller users to feel subtle changes in grip under acceleration and braking. Forza Motorsport 5 even engaged the cloud to fuel the next iteration of its drivatar vision. While Forza's drivatar concept had begun life as a learning AI with various parameters to be filled as you perfected your own driving style, in Forza Motorsport 5, it exploded into a system that would track and analyze the racing styles of every player, learning the lines they preferred, the tricks they tried, and the risks they took. Drivatar opponents would sometimes take unconventional lines into corners and were often happy to go several cars wide into bends that regular computer AI would have putted around in a polite convoy. It had its kinks, but it was still an intriguing alternative to the more pedestrian and predictable AI we were more accustomed to at the time. Forza Horizon 2 arrived in 2014, establishing a Forza Motorsport Forza Horizon 2-year cadence that would continue up until the arrival of Forza Horizon 4. Forza Horizon 2 was the Xbox One debut for the highly popular spin-off series, although a similar but separate version of the game had also been developed for Xbox 360, courtesy of fellow UK studio Sumo Digital. Horizon 2 traded the US for Europe, switching out Colorado for a region encompassing the south of France and parts of northern Italy. Beginning with the image-based lighting system and physically modelled materials of Forza Motorsport 5, Playground's challenge was to finesse these into its dynamic world and make them work at any time of day and in any atmospheric or weather condition. Playground was not only able to introduce dynamic weather and rain to the Forza series for the first time, but also every single light in a scene was dynamic, meaning the way headlights sliced through the unlit country streets to the way lights reflected and rolled over the bodywork of cars was next level at the time. Horizon 2 also featured a major change to its brand of racing, tearing down the barriers that had largely stopped players from heading off-road in the original. This meant we could tear through fields, fences, and forests at will, and it opened up a new dimension of driving. However, it also boasted a major shift to the way it handled multiplayer, employing a seriously impressive system for seamlessly transitioning players online and offline without skipping a beat. Unlike the original Horizon, which treated solo play and online multiplayer as two bespoke modes, in Horizon 2 you could instantly switch between one and the other at any time in any part of the world. No lobbies, no loading, just straight in. One moment you'd be cruising in single player, and with the push of a button, you'd be transitioned from solo mode to online play. In the space of this sentence, the current weather conditions and traffic would be seamlessly synced with an online session in progress. Happily, Horizon 2's weather effects and night racing would jump to Forza Motorsport 6, which launched in 2015. Time of day lighting and rain wasn't dynamic in Forza Motorsport 6, and it couldn't quite match the incredible droplet behaviour of the rain in Sony's Drive Club, but the fidelity here was still quite staggering at the time, especially since in this case it was all achieved with 24 cars on track and at an unbending 60 frames per second. Forza Motorsport 6 also added 3D puddles of standing water to tracks during torrid conditions, and the drag of the water made for a new and challenging driving experience. With more tracks returning, rebuilt for the Xbox One, and double the garage of Forza Motorsport 5, things continued looking up for the flagship Motorsport series. But the next cab off the rank was Forza Horizon 3, where things were heading down. Down under, that is. Forza Horizon 3 sent the Horizon Festival to Australia and resulted in an award-winning open-world racer that absolutely blew away expectations. Searching for new ways to augment the game with unprecedented levels of visual authenticity, Playground created a custom 12K resolution camera rig it would use to take thousands of high-res images of the Australian sky, capturing complete 24-hour logs of life under an Australian summer. Applied to the game, it simply cannot be understated just how brilliant the end product looked. And not simply because the sky is more or less half of the frame at any given moment anyway, but because of how profoundly it affected everything else. With the sky as the game's key source of light, everything below it looked better than ever. It may have required members of the Playground team to spend a worrying amount of time isolated in the Australian bush fending off a cavalcade of creatures keen to kill them, but the payoff was extraordinary. Forza Horizon 3 was also built using HDR support for the arrival of the Xbox One S, and it was later updated with native 4K support following the launch of the even more potent Xbox One X. The Xbox One X was released in late 2017, shortly after the arrival of Forza Motorsport 7. Crammed with enough cars to fill a dozen museums and the most generous selection of tracks to date in the series, Forza Motorsport 7 would prove to be a top-notch Xbox One swan song for the main series, as we now await the Xbox Series X and S rebuild that Turn 10 is currently hard at work on. Forza Motorsport 7, though, was a true technical tour de force. On Xbox One X, it was a native 4K 60 frames per second racing game that delivered an experience previously limited to high-end PCs. But even on the standard Xbox One, Turn 10 still crafted a wonderful looking 1080p 60 frames per second stunner that never skipped a beat, regardless of the rain effects or how many other racers you were sharing the screen with. Where could the Forza crew go from here? Not that far really, at least in terms of Playground games. It set its next Horizon game on its own doorstep. Jokes aside, Forza Horizon 4 is a bona fide blockbuster that's still wowing players to this day. With Xbox One X as the team's lead platform, the amount of visual and performance improvements they were able to wring out of the console was extensive. Lighting, reflections, and shadows were bumped up across the board, and the dynamic shadows at night are particularly snazzy. Forza Horizon 4's biggest drawcard, however, is its constantly shifting seasons, which basically meant stuffing 4 worlds into the game as opposed to just one, from a green and lush sun-kissed Britain to one partially buried under a sparkling blanket of snow. Forza Horizon 4 on Xbox One also features a 60 frames per second performance mode that pegs back the resolution to 1080p, but still retains a lot of the settings from the 4K quality mode. A 2020 update for Series X and S would bring more improvements, most notably with the drastically slashed loading times afforded by the SSD storage. What can the Forza teams do with Forza Horizon 5 with the series consoles as lead platform this time? Well, we've already seen it in action, and the results are typically amazing. Check out IGN's Forza Horizon 5 review for more details and our verdict, and for everything else, stick with IGN.